So Kelly King, Pacific Biodiesel, thank you so much for joining us here in the studio.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
So what I want to talk to you about is what's come to me over the past few weeks, where I found, to my surprise, that there are people who actually oppose biofuel. I didn't believe that. I thought, well, biofuel is one of the array of clean energy possibilities that are growing in the state of Hawaii. But then a couple of times I found that people are actually opposing it for different various reasons. And I said, well, maybe that's part of the maturation process, that we have to go through. But I wanted to pose the objections to you and get your reaction.
Yeah.
The first one I can recall was kind of a shock to find that Blue Planet feels that we have to go back to our roots to preserve, the earth. And biofuel is inconsistent with climate, protecting against climate change, because biofuel gives off CO2 just like fossil fuel. Comment.
Humans give off CO2.
Okay.
Every living thing on this earth gives off CO2, and I know the argument because I've heard Hank Rogers talk about it. The executive director of Blue Planet actually drives on biodiesel, so I'm not sure that opinion is throughout Blue Planet. I don't want to get anybody in trouble here, but I think with the understanding, Jeff Michelina has looked at all these different types of technologies in his other life as the head of the Sierra Club, and what the scientific side of it says, which is the truth, is that what the CO2 that's being given off is being sequestered by the plant, and that's why it's a reduction in overall CO2s. It's compared to what? Compared to fossil fuels, there's a reduction in CO2s. And so the basics of it, and a lot of people don't understand this is what's meant by renewable fuels, is that you have a field of sunflowers, say, and if you grow a field of sunflowers and you let them sit there and die, they're going to give off a tremendous amount of CO2. But if you cut them off and you press the seeds and you make it into fuel and you burn it, it's going to give off CO2. But that CO2 is sequestered, has already been sequestered by the plant. So it's a renewable cycle that starts here and ends here. And in contrast to fossil fuels, which is something that we're pulling out of the earth and we're putting into the atmosphere, and there's nothing, that same animal is never going to sequester, the same dead dino.
Right, so it's only so much. Yeah.
Right, they're not going to sequester any more CO2. So it's a negative effect for the planet, whereas when you look at renewable fuels, it's a positive effect for the planet.
Yeah. Okay.
Especially compared to the untold numbers of vehicles that are going to continue to burn fossil fuels. We're not even the electric cars that are out there right now. If they're plugging into a system that's using fossil fuels. So I have to say I've got a better CO2 footprint with my biodiesel car than any of the plug-ins if they're plugging in at home and they're hooked up to the grid.
Yeah, and all this really suggests that we have to have a certain reality test, a certain mindset in dealing with renewable energy, and we can't. I think some people want to, get rid of any fossil fuel right now and go to the end game right now, and they don't see that there's a middle game. They don't see there's a dynamic that goes over a period of decades in the world, and you can't have the end game right now. We're talking about billions of people changing the way they live.
Yeah, right, exactly. You can't, if you want to go back to the caveman days, then that's what you get with the end game if you go to it too quickly.
So to me, the point I think is we have to have, I hate to use this word, a plan, or at least we have to see it as a dynamic that will take a while, and there are various steps in the dynamic, and we can't jump to the last step before we finish some of the middle steps.
Right.
So the other thing is agriculture, and this is not necessarily an order of importance, but I've heard Richard Ha on Big Island, say, well, the farmers will not make money growing biofuel in the state of Hawaii, therefore they won't grow biofuel, and we won't have any local biofuel. And it's a factor. It's not determinative, but it's a factor as to whether we can and will grow biofuel here. People would like to see that happen. Will it happen? Is he right?
Is this the same Richard Ha that is now trying to buy out HECO? Okay. Well, let's see. Is that grounded in reality? Well, I have to say that we are working with farmers who are growing biofuels. So maybe maybe his own personal preference is not to grow biofuels, but I think there are some forward-thinking people in agriculture out there that understand the importance of it, that understand there's going to be a balance, not based on just growing a crop for biofuels, but growing a crop that has diverse byproducts and value-added products, and it's going to be a holistic approach. Those are the kind of farmers we want to work with, and those are the ones that we're finding. Since we've got this project now, this congressional appropriation, which is, I know, the dreaded term.
Are there still appropriations?
No, but this is one that we started
still
2
a
years
Congress,
ago.
you know?
Yeah, right. We'll find out after Friday. But we've been working on this project for probably over a decade, and 2 years ago, this avenue of funding. So now we've got some real funding to work with the military to grow a biofuel crop. And since the project has kicked off, we've actually gotten a lot of interest from farmers across the state who are interested in growing something. And so I think once we have a model where we can talk about maybe a couple of different types of crops that we're planning to grow, like sunflower and safflower, and the byproduct, the benefits to, say, the cattle industry, huge benefit. I mean, I was just talking to one of the members of the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum today, who was telling me about the years ago when he found out that they were actually flying cattle to Canada to feed them, from Hawaii.
And then we get the meat back.
Yeah, then we buy.
I remember that.
Back.
I remember that. The big
so
island,
yeah. So what is the value to having a feedlot here where we can actually grow our own beef and slaughter it here and eat our own beef instead of buying it back from Canadians? I think the peripheral benefits of actually growing these types of crops are going to be food, fuel, other industries like maybe soap. I'm talking to a fellow on the mainland who is working with a community in Puerto Rico where they're making soap out of the byproduct from biodiesel over there, and maybe we can think about that kind of industry over here. And we have a lot of boutique soap makers who have to buy their glycerin from the mainland or China or somewhere else. So I think with that kind of approach, that it's going to make a lot of sense, and especially as fuel climbs in price, and gets up to $5, $6, $7 a gallon. Fuel is around $9 or $10 a gallon at the pump in Europe, and nobody's screaming over there because they've adapted their lifestyle to these high fuel prices, and they have different forms of transportation. They have communities where they can access the things that they need within blocks instead of driving, say, from Kapolei to Honolulu to work and buy stuff and your entertainment. So yeah, our lifestyles are going to have to adapt.
But let me get a vision from you. I'd like to sort of develop a vision of how this would work. First of all, I'm forming a new religion for myself. It's called the Outer Island religion, or excuse me, the Neighbor Island religion. Because I think the neighbor islands have kind of drifted off. They're sort of floating away. They got loose and they're floating away. And you're from Maui, so you know exactly what I mean. You're an exception to that rule, but there's a lot of people on the neighbor islands that would like the neighbor islands to float away but not be connected in any way. So, ergo, the resistance to the undersea cable, ergo the resistance to the ferry, and, we don't want to be connected. We really have to work on that. That's an important, issue for me.
Well, let me just say this about those two issues, because it doesn't have to do with being connected to Oahu. It has to do with not recognizing what's involved, especially from an environmental aspect, in getting these things to commercialization properly. That was really the big. My husband was the chair of the State Environmental Council during the time of the super ferry. He rode the super ferry. We thought the super ferry was great. We did not think it was great that they were thumbing their noses at the environmental laws and that the state legislature was creating laws just to get them around these issues. That was what sunk the super ferry. It was not that that people on the neighbor islands didn't want a way to be connected.
Well, some of them didn't. You'll have to agree.
Some of them might have not have wanted it, but that was the thing that killed it. And that's what went to court. It was a lot of people who are sad to see that super ferry go, because we had a way to get our cars over. We had a way
it was
to
major
ship
benefit.
Things, but they didn't do it properly, and I think that set a huge precedent. If that had been allowed to happen, and it was a corporate effort. And so what it was seen as, if a large corporation comes here with big enough money, they can get around any of our laws that they want to.
Yeah.
So and that's part of our model, is to stay focused on community and do things in conjunction with the community that benefit the community. The underwater cable is not seen as benefiting necessarily the communities on the neighbor islands, and that's where they're getting the big pushback.
Yeah. Well, and there are other, kinds of. I mean, I think the cable is symbolic of a desire. I'm thinking of Molokai for the moment. Of not serving Oahu, and Oahu has its troubles. We'll do ours. Oahu can do its, and so forth. But my religion is to bring the islands together.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of a little bit like Neil.
Kamehameha.
Yeah, okay. Well, like Neil Abercrombie.
Yeah.
The modern
less
Kamehameha.
bloody way. Less bloody way than King Kamehameha.
But so, in my model for biofuels, I see what amber waves of grain. You know what I mean? I see the neighbor islands coming back to an agriculture, just as you
Mm-hmm.
say, that serves a lot of purposes, and one of them would be biofuel.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, a lot of it is fallow. I mean, a huge amount of land.
Of land is fallow.
And what's growing, if anything, is growing, in size and productivity. It's the seed crop kind of thing, which occupies now 100,000 acres in our state. Which is all shipped offshore
Right.
by multinationals.
Right.
And I like to see land, large tracts of land used just as you described.
Right.
So what would it look like? I mean, what would be Jethropa? What would it be to grow the biofuels?
It would be many different things, and that is the beauty of biodiesel, because we are looking at for the fuel side, we're looking at one end product, and we can market biodiesel, and we can continue to hone that technology, and the fuel is at an this new biodiesel plant that we're building on the Big Island, it's at an amazing quality where it actually is fairly clear. It almost looks like water. So we've done a lot with the technology side, but the point is that we can develop and market biodiesel for many different markets. For the diesel engine is on road transportation, farming equipment, backup generation, boats, trains, everything. And we can grow many different things in different climates, whatever's best. You can't take one crop and grow it throughout the whole island, because whatever the byproducts are, there aren't enough. We looked at this years ago when we first started looking at soy, and there aren't enough cattle in the state of Hawaii to eat all the byproduct of soybeans. So what you want to do is you want to look at a mix of different crops that are going to provide different byproducts, and some of them will be maybe even food for human consumption. And the great thing is you can change those crops, and you don't have to come up with a whole new marketing scheme. When you look at what's happened with sugar and pineapple and macadamia nuts and coffee, you grow coffee, you market coffee. If coffee goes down, there's nothing else you can replace it with to make coffee. It's coffee. Same thing for all these other specialty products. But for biodiesel, you can grow.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Why aren't we doing that exactly?
Well, because everybody's waiting for the information, for someone to tell them, if you grow this, it's going to cost you this much. Here are the methods you need to use, and here's how much you're going to make per acre. That's what everybody's waiting for, except for the one farmer we're working for on the Big Island. They were the ones that stepped out and said, we're going to do this, and we're going to find out if it's going to make us money.
Sure, because who could find out better than somebody's doing it?
Yeah, I mean, the researchers have tried. They've tried to provide information. It's really going to take the farming community.
I mean, they say that a gallon of biofuel off agriculture is more expensive than a gallon of fossil fuel oil. Is it true?
It's only more expensive because of the subsidies that fossil fuels get. So you have to make this comparison, because we're dealing in a world where we have to compete against petroleum. And if you look at just hundreds of billions of dollars of petroleum subsidies that industry gets every year, we're getting maybe hundreds of millions, not even $1 billion in subsidy every year. The biofuel sector has done incredibly well with just a minute percentage of what the petroleum industry gets. So if you took all the subsidies away from the petroleum industry, we'd be flying. And that's one of the reasons why this industry hasn't taken off like it should.
Let me even put it another way, though, on the one economic question. So today I looked, it's $102 today for a gallon, or rather a barrel of oil. What is it if I go into the marketplace to buy agricultural biofuel, is it 102 or less or more?
You know, it depends. Well, right now, if you went to buy our diesel fuel, it would be less. It's pretty much, we're the cheapest fuel on the island of Maui right now.
And that's from animal fats?
That's from waste cooking oil.
Okay.
So that's the best feedstock. It's very limited, but it's the best feedstock because you're also recycling a waste product. When you get to the point where with agriculture, we are actually utilizing canola oil in Oregon. And
Unless you have a refinery there.
Right, our refineries. We built on the mainland. We've built 10, I believe it's 9 biodiesel plants. Two of them which we own and operate still. The other ones we built for clients, and they're all multi-feedstock, so they can use virgin crop oils, they can use waste oils, they can use animal fats, whatever's available. It's set up as a regional model, a community-based model. So,
and it's regional in the sense that you expect the market in that region will buy what that plant generates.
Right, and it's tied to the amount of resources in that region that can feed.
The approach.
None of the biodiesel plants that we've built can make enough fuel to fuel their entire community's diesel needs. So I think it's very difficult to oversaturate the markets compared to what the resources,
but
available
in the future
resources.
It's possible.
Well, we would like to think it would be.
You build more plants, you generate more, and I mean, if these plants are pretty, what's the word? I mean, it's pretty productive. You know what you're going to get on a given day. You can store it. You can serve all the needs, just as the fossil fuel was serving all the needs.
Right, and if you can develop a community-based regional model where you have what we're trying to develop in Hawaii, which is a relationship with your farmers, and you're not looking at the Wall Street price of the commodity for jatropha oil today that goes up and down and maybe not in conjunction with fossil fuels. So, sometimes you're playing that's why when the economy crashed, a lot of these large biodiesel plants on the mainland went bankrupt because they're playing in markets where they're buying off the commodity markets for soybean oil. When soybean oil goes like that and petroleum goes like that, how are they going to compete with this price when now they're paying more for their feedstock than they can sell their fuel for? They're out of sync. But if you can develop, what we're trying to do is develop long-term contracts with farmers where they can be whole, they know they can make money, they know what their costs are, and they can project out. Right, and then we can say, well, here's what we can afford to pay you, and now our profit margin is fairly steady, and your profit margin will be fairly steady, and maybe both of them will go up if the price of fossil fuel goes up and we can charge a little bit more. But the idea is to get away from that very risky market hedging corporate type of attitude about biofuels, where it's really about your community, your home, the people that you know, and the people that want cleaner fuel in your community.
Well, as it grows, as the technology smooths out, everything gets predictable, it probably will be smoother, don't you think? But in my little plan here for the islands, where let's take it an island by island approach, because I think with biofuels you can do that. You can make a plant on each island, and you can suit the the production of the plant to the needs of the island ultimately.
Right.
So if it's a big island, you have a big plant and so forth. So with that plan, we get these fallow fields growing again. We get farmers who can get predictable prices by long-term contracts, I guess with the utility. And they can make a living, and they can keep doing that, and they can satisfy all the needs with the existing fossil fuel infrastructure, which I want to talk to you about, like Kapolei.
Right.
So that's kind of a nirvana. What are the downsides to that? Tell me again why we are not doing that right now.
We're not doing that right now because we're competing against a petroleum market that has a history of whenever renewable energy has gotten going, they
drop the prices.
They drop the price, they turn on the spigot.
You mean that's intentional?
Well, I can't read their minds, and maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist, but it seems to happen.
It seems to happen.
And every time that happens, we just saw it 3 years ago. Every time the prices go up, people say, okay, now let's focus on renewables. We can't forget about it when the price goes down. Well, guess what happens? As soon as the price went down, people forgot about it. And then there's always an excuse. This last time it was the economy.
Yeah.
So, but if we're looking at something that is going to help our economy, then maybe that's when it has to happen, is when the economy's down, because that's when people are, foremost in their minds. It's sort of like what you're told with a lot with when you're in business, and from my end, from being in the marketing side, when things are rough and you're not making enough money, that's when you need to advertise, and that's when people cut back because they can't afford it, but really you can't afford not to.
Yeah.
So we're sort of in that situation right now where we can't afford not to, and if you look at what's happening in the Middle East right now, we're going to be in some big trouble if the political situation gets worse.
That's why I do not understand people who take one particular clean energy source and beat up on that source, when really, I don't know if you agree with this, but really we should be embracing all sources,
right,
and encouraging and incentivizing
right,
all sources, so we have a robust response to the guys who make the fossil fuel.
Right, and we, as a company, we've been doing that. We've been supporting the other industries for at least 10 years now. And when I give presentations and I talk about the most appropriate technologies for the best uses, we've always been a big supporter when we have PV panels on our own house, and we try to support the geothermal guys, everybody who's doing their piece of it. But it has to be, there has to be an overall plan for what types of energy are best for what types of uses, so that we don't, because we're never going to be able to fuel the entire electric company grid with agriculture.
Okay, that's I was going to ask you that.
Right, so
this isn't directed at ultimately having one dominant source.
No.
Even in the foreseeable distant future, we will have multiple sources.
Right, exactly. And we've always seen the best first use for biofuel, for biodiesel, certainly as transportation, farming, backup generation, things like that. It's industrial. And I've even been told by folks at DBED in the past that they see ethanol as a transitional fuel because of the invent and the advent, hopefully the imminency of once we do get our grid off of petroleum, that we would have electric vehicles. And so
Right,
from the
so
gasoline point of view,
only. It's right,
yeah,
over.
but that they see biodiesel as long-term, because biodiesel has industrial uses. You're never going to create an electric-powered barge that can, deliver goods from the mainland over here. Backup generation is really important. Farming equipment, I don't know if they ever foresee doing heavy-duty farming with electric tractors. So there's always going to be a market for biodiesel, and if you can match that market up suitably, even if we go from the back end and we say we have this much land, agricultural land, we're going to probably need this much for food, and we need this much for fuel. Okay, so if we could only grow this much, where should that fuel be used? We're in areas where we don't have options for wind and solar and geothermal and those other things. So it's almost so common sense that you never hear people talking about it. Mm. But
let me go back to my thing about the agricultural vision. So you said that there's a farmer or some farmers on a big island that are going to find out the necessary data to make it work for them by simply experimenting with it. Which I think
they've got 250 acres growing now.
Well, that's a lot.
They've been growing for 3 years. They've committed to 1,000 acres. So it's real.
And they're supplying you right now today.
Well, they're at the point where they've done their first harvest, and we're waiting for the crushing machine to get
exciting.
there. So it's very exciting. It's very
that's
exciting.
Great. Wow, you stand there.
We heard about
the vine, the wine harvest.
Well, we heard about when they first started growing, and they were a little bit secretive, and all the stuff you see proposed in the state. After they'd been growing for about 1.5 years, we were invited to go see, and literally my husband and I walked through the fields and started getting tears in our eyes, because here's somebody who has stepped out there and said, and it's a real crop. And it's not a few trees here and a few trees there. You see rows, and you see the kind of equipment that can do industrial crops. So I asked this farmer, what made you do this? Everyone else is sitting around waiting to find out, for someone to tell them that they're going to make money.
This is a local
someone to
small capital farmer. This is not
a local farmer who's
mainland
been doing
company or anything.
No, they've been doing coffee in the state of Hawaii for decades.
Okay.
And the family goes way back to the missionary days
That's
here.
Great.
Anyway, what he told me was, my son went to school on the mainland, became an accountant. And while he was getting his degree, he learned about biodiesel, and he got very excited. And because this gentleman was growing coffee, and he also has a construction company, he uses in his peak months up to 50,000 gallons of diesel fuel a month, his son said, "Dad, you can grow your own fuel. You know, this is," and he started sharing with him information about jatropha and about biodiesel. And so I asked the father, "Well, what, you know, so that was your, you know, what made you, you put a lot of money into this. What made you take this risk?" He said, "I don't know if this is going to make me money. It sounds like a good idea. I've done a lot of research on it. But I asked my son, will you come back to the farm and run this farm?" And he said yes. And he said, that makes it all
What
worth
price,
it to me.
family?
And not only is he, now he's excited about his future, and he's excited about what he can contribute to the community.
What a,
I mean,
that's
isn't
great story.
that's not a tearjerker? I mean, it was so beautiful.
Absolutely.
And he said, you know, we'll find out, and I think we'll make it work because, you know, well, his son's a pencil pusher now. He can figure out the economics of it.
We have to go make a movie of that farm.
It's you know, just to me, it was kind of the reason why we started our company, was because we didn't know what was going to make us money. We didn't know what it was going to be, but you take the risk and you think about what you want for your future and for the future of your community and your children. And that's what this guy did.
Yeah, so you know, he's an object lesson. You know, he's a poster child in a way for a lot of people who might go into farming. I mean, to me, the resurrection of farming in the state is very important. It's part of my religion, actually.
Yeah, and he's definitely the poster child. When you look at the same time that he's telling me this, I had just been hearing from other presenters at the kind of conferences I go to that the average age of a farmer in the state of Hawaii is 60.
Yeah, I saw that.
You know, and he got his son to come back who's, you know, under 30 and run this farm.
This is a big deal.
This is a huge deal, and it's a huge deal for me as a mother, thinking about, you know, because both my kids are involved in our company as well, one of them in the state of Hawaii, one of them on the mainland, to think about passing along not just the business side of things, but the passion for making these things happen.
It's a value system.
Yeah, it's a value system, and it's about your community.
Yeah. So so right now I got that farm working, and that is a great statement, and it will undoubtedly have a ripple effect. It's to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it depends, I suppose, on whether the community hears about it, and we'll try to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
But what about all the other, you know, acreage and islands and prospective farmers? I mean, there's a negative drift on farming. It's plantation. It's old, it's manual labor and all that. It may not earn you the kind of living you want. And if you're not up on these issues, you know, as a value system, you may not care about it. You may care about creature comfort instead. Mm-hmm. How do we get Hawaii to turn the direction on this?
Well, I think biofuels is a huge part of that, because what I've seen over the last decade and a half of farming is that all those things you talked about happened with food farming. Because that's really, you know, decades ago is what we were talking about, and working on the pineapple fields for a plantation or a cane. Yeah, that did sound like manual labor. You know, you're working for the boss, but somehow biofuels has become, in the agricultural community, something new and interesting and maybe even sexy,
High tech, and so it's attracted a lot of people to at least start thinking about it. And you know, one of the negative issues with biofuels that is totally manufactured was this food versus fuel thing. You know, the argument that if you grow biofuels, you're just what about?
food.
I was going to ask you that.
We've got all these fallow fields; they're growing nothing. So, you know, especially for the state of Hawaii, why would we not want to grow a crop that has the option for either? Why would we not want to give ourselves that option? If we grew something like sunflower and we had acres and acres of sunflower, and we could get people to grow it because they're growing it for biofuel, and that's sexy and that's fun and that's exciting.
But it's also food.
And then something happens, and you know, we have some kind of a food crisis, and we can eat our fuel crops. You know, I think a lot of us would rather walk and have our stomachs full than drive somewhere and have nothing to eat. So why would we not want that option? Why would we try to talk people into?
It's not an either or.
Right, exactly.
It's not a zero-sum game.
Let's get ag going, and maybe when we start getting, when people see that we can start making a significant dent in fuel, because for us, you know, every gallon of biodiesel we make is a gallon of petroleum that doesn't have to come into this island. It's 90 cents of every dollar of revenue that we bring in to the state stays in the state of Hawaii.
Stays in the state. This is a wonderful thing, and
So-
people don't realize, they don't think on the macro level.
Yeah.
But what is it, $7 or $8 billion we're sending offshore, If that was given to your neighbor next door, we'd all be happier.
Yeah, and if we had the whole agricultural industry in this as well, food as well as fuel, and we were doing the same thing with food, and now guess what? We have our fuel that we need to grow our food. We're making here as well. I mean, it's just there's a lot of bonus that even though rates are going up for food and fuel, that's going to happen anyway. But the return on that is going to be incredible.
Well,
to the community and to the state coffers.
I think we have to keep public opinion focused in the right direction. And it scares me when I hear people say, we'll never want any more biofuel plants. Kapolei is the last one. We don't want that infrastructure to be used for biofuel anymore. That's ridiculous. Because, I think Kapolei is a brilliant idea. I don't know how you feel about this. So you have a generating plant that I suppose it could have been used, or the money could have been used to make a plant that burned fossil fuel, but now we burn biofuel. And we could have all the plants actually converted, it's not very hard, right, to biofuel plants. Do you have a problem with any of that? I see that as a natural transition.
Well, I think trying to fuel all of the electric generation with biofuel is a problem because it does take a tremendous amount of egg. I think we could definitely do transportation, and we could do backup generation and farming equipment, things like that.
Like the peaking plant.
Yeah.
So the peaking plant is
that's
not the base load,
or even look at some of these other technologies as the prime power and the biofuel
like
generation
wind,
as backup.
like solar.
Yeah, because it could be firm power backup. But I think if you took a community that was against biofuels and you said, okay, if we had a level playing field between biofuels and petroleum, you'd be paying $10 a gallon. You guys buy all your fuel, all the petroleum. The rest of this other community is going to get biofuels for $7 a gallon. And it's going to be grown here, and the return stays here, and it's going to be providing jobs and cleaner environment. But you can have your petroleum and your empty land.
That's the way you feel about it.
I think that's sometimes how you have to hit the people that don't have the vision. And I have to say that I've been very impressed with the Big Island. It's one of the reasons we're doing this new plant, because this new plant is just going to blow the current technology away. It's a real refinery. And one of the reasons we're doing it on the Big Island is because of the communities over there asking us to come there. We had two different groups. One was in Javi and the other one was in Kona.
Javi, a little tiny town like that.
Called me up, and this was maybe 5 years ago,
Wow.
and said, would you and your husband come over? We'll fly you over here. We'll put you up in a hotel. Just come and talk to a group of us about how we can get biodiesel production over here. And then we had people, talk about NIMBYs, not in my backyard. We had people showing us their backyard saying this would be a great place for a biodiesel
Reverse
plant.
NIMBY.
And we actually, when we started going back to some of these people when we were building this model of community ownership and looking for local investors, some of these people, there were a couple people that said, I'd like to invest, but only if you put it on my property over here.
I love it.
It's the total opposite.
Document this.
Yeah, it was such a great thing to hear, even though the property that we were shown wasn't quite appropriate for the plant. But it was, when I hear Robbie Alm talk about the NIMBYs, and I'm thinking, if you do it right, you're not going to have that. That's the problem, is you're always going to get that when you're not paying attention to the community, you're not looking at sustainability, you're not planning for the future and how this is going to affect the community.
That's how you present it.
It's not even just about how you present it. It's about what you're trying to do for the community. What are we trying to do? I think with the underwater cable, we're trying to fuel Oahu first. That's the main goal of the underwater cable. As much as you might want to flower it with, well, this is going to put $1 million in this fund for the island of Lanai. Our main goal is making fuel for the renewable fuel for these islands with their resources.
Yeah, so let's can you, with this plant in the Big Island, can you fuel the existing generation infrastructure there? Or it's only a fraction? I know they got wind, and certainly they got geothermal, and they got PV, I'm sure. So can you, but with the existing infrastructure?
It could go into it. It's not gonna fuel the entire plant, but it's not intended to. It's really intended, quantity-wise. We're looking at, well, what is 40%? This is the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative. What is 40% displacement for the Big Island for on-road transportation for diesel? You know, that's the size that we're
So
building.
it's primarily for
I
transport.
mean,
In other words,
we'll probably be selling. We intend to sell some to all the other, you know, to the farmers and the power plant, and you know, you have to do that to get the market to the place where, I mean, because we're not gonna even get to full production
Well,
and instantly have.
let's say I'm a farmer and
Mhm.
I have a truck. Well, I guess I got to get a diesel
Mhm.
truck. But so I go and buy a diesel truck, and I understand it's hard to find them these days, and I got to get it converted a little.
No.
I don't. Any diesel truck
Mhm.
will work with biofuel,
Right.
no problem.
Biodiesel.
Biodiesel, okay, and this plant will make biodiesel.
Right.
So that's a miraculous thing, except I still got to get the truck.
Right.
And the truck is more expensive than a fossil fuel
But you're gonna
gas
get better
truck.
mileage.
That's true, that's true, and using a better fuel. So
Mhm.
that's one source. But you said you had, you know, really good technology, especially on the mainland. Could you make, I don't know, I think I already know the answer, but could you make jet fuel? No, not yet.
We could, but we don't want to,
Because?
because the process for making jet fuel is more expensive than the process of making biodiesel, and jet fuel is a lower value product. So we've talked to the military about this. Why would we spend more money and more energy to make a product that you want us to sell to you for less?
No deal. But I mean, if we go the route of using biofuel to make jet fuel, I mean, on a macro, on a macro basis, then what'll happen is it's more expensive than existing jet
And why,
fuel.
you know, if we're looking at shortages, global shortages, if we can do what we're already capable of doing right now and doing well, and we can fuel everything on the ground and everything on the water that uses diesel fuel, and then we still have more product, yeah, then we'll look at the jet fuel market.
Well,
But why? But everything we displace on the ground, which we can do for a lot less, and certainly a lot less insurance, because you know, if one of those planes falls out of the sky, it's the
They'll
first thing
blame
they're
the
going to
fuel.
blame, right?
Sure.
But if we can displace, you know, huge quantities on the ground, significant quantities, that leaves more petroleum for the jets. You know, it still will benefit every other user of petroleum
Right.
every time
So
we
you do
displace
first things
one market.
first.
Why would we not go for the low-hanging fruit?
It's a
you know?
priority thing, yeah.
It's a priority thing. It's much easier and better. And the thing about not only just the fleets and the industrial equipment, but individuals who drive on biodiesel, is every person who drives on biodiesel is part of the solution on a daily basis, and they don't even have to think about it. They just have to drive in and fuel up, and you know, this is when I did surveys in the earlier years of our company about why people use biodiesel. It was at least 50% of them wanted to feel good about their vehicle, and you know, it was several years after we started when we got into this war in Iraq, and people came in the droves. I do not want to be contributing to what we're doing over there.
Right.
So there are a myriad of reasons why individuals want to be involved in this process as well. And when you talk to somebody who hasn't been to a gas station in 5 years in the state of Hawaii and is running exclusively on biodiesel, what that does for them as an individual. I mean, it's kind of like,
Emancipation.
yeah, and it's kind of, you start looking for other things in your life that you can do too. It's sort of what happened to us when we got our PV panels. You know, you start really paying attention to the amount of energy you use when
Yeah.
you start getting, you know, it's a movement.
Yeah.
It's beyond just the
But
product.
you know where I can't reconcile, and you can help me, and sort of a lot of this is to sort of look down from 50,000 feet and try to integrate all these factors in the community, all these things that are happening, the technology and people's opinions and all that. So can you integrate for me the advent, you spoke of this earlier, the advent of the electric car, and for that matter, rail, which is going to be drawing off the grid, and biodiesel, which will service at least some vehicles in the very same community. Are we going to have a lot of cars electric and a lot of cars biodiesel all operating the same way? How does that work?
Well, I think when we get to the point where our grid is off of petroleum, and then you're seeing the true value of an electric vehicle being totally
Right,
renewable.
right. It won't happen until then.
You'll
yeah.
probably get, yeah, it's maybe 30 years away, but you know, I think you'll see a lot of passenger cars going to electric. You know, and certainly the person you spoke about earlier who had those opinions about biofuels has a passenger car. If he had a fleet of diesel trucks, he might have a different opinion about biofuels. So, you know, and that's really not our market. You know, our market is not passenger cars because, especially in this country, you don't see a lot of passenger cars on diesel.
No. There was a time when there were more of them, actually.
Well, and if you go to Europe or
Sure.
Asia, you see them all over the place.
Sure.
But you know, in years ago when we talked about the the business sense of having a retail biodiesel pump on Maui, because you know we sell most of our fuel wholesale. You know, we thought we think about that every once in a while. Should we really be operating? It's a lot more, you know, time and energy. You have to pay somebody to service it. But what it does for, I think, for the community and for access to that opportunity is so valuable, and it's important for those who do support what we're doing to be a part of it, to not just look at it from a side and go, well, that's great what they're doing, but to actually say, and I'm driving on it, you know, and I'm not using fossil fuels, and I'm not.
What are you driving exactly?
I drive well, we have 3 cars. One of them is a Liberty, Jeep Liberty. One of them is a Jetta, which is, I think, a 2000 Jetta. When we
These are all biofuel cars?
Right, all diesel. And then one of them is a 99 Mercedes.
Okay.
So they all run on 100% biodiesel.
And there's no downside to that? It doesn't gunk up the engines or anything?
No, I mean, one of the things that happens with when you switch over is that, and a lot of people don't realize this, I didn't realize this, even though I was married to a diesel mechanic for forever, is that when you have diesel, petroleum diesel fuel in your fuel tank, you will have algae living in your fuel tank. And algae lives quite symbiotically with diesel fuel. It just will sit in your tank. When you put biodiesel in it, it kills that algae. It acts as a biocide and it flushes it out. And so that's what gunks up your tank, is whatever it's flushing out of your tank. So what we tell people is if you've been on diesel fuel for several years, you either want to get your fuel tank cleaned out first, or you just change your filters more often the first few times, and then once that's all flushed out, you won't have that anymore.
Interesting. Oh, I didn't know. I don't think people know that.
So well, we've been telling people till we're blue in the face, but you know, it's always it's a constant education.
It goes back to the whole thing about educating the farmers. You know, I mean, it'd be nice to have a complete education. I mean, a college course, an immersion training, if you will, on how to farm these new crops, and how to get people into the classroom. So I don't know how we do that, but to me that's a high priority. And likewise, to me it's a high priority to teach people about energy, all kinds of things, not just biofuel, but everything,
right,
so that they can make intelligent choices and not be ignorant about it. But let's go to you know, the whole division. It seems like to me it's a natural division. You're talking about the passenger cars. You leave them with Detroit, which doesn't like diesel. Or maybe Asia, which I think is going to be making an awful lot of electric cars because they see that as the future. I think we're going to find China is going to make pretty good electric cars, and we're going to buy them. And then that's passenger. Commercial, industrial vehicles, including buses and trucks and all that, that'll all be a good candidate for biodiesel.
Right. Yeah, the diesel engine is an amazing invention. And there's actually a fellow we're working with who's become a good friend from Colorado named Eddie Sturman from Sturman Industries, who has invented, and he's in the Space Foundation Hall of Fame. He was actually responsible for inventing the valve that allowed Apollo 13 to re-enter the Earth, that actually saved that mission from being destroyed. So, so he's a genius, and he's invented an engine that will run on any kind of fuel. The engine adjusts, and it makes no NOx, it makes no emissions, and what he likes the best is biodiesel. Of all the fuels, you know, he can run it on ethanol, petroleum, natural gas, biodiesel.
Why?
He likes biodiesel.
Why does he like biodiesel?
He says it's the best fuel. It's the most energy efficient. And if you look at the energy balance of biodiesel, it blows most of the other alternative fuels away. You know, the energy balance, well, now it's even better because of the types of farming equipment that have become more energy efficient. So they used to say it was 1 unit of energy for every 3.2 units out, and now it's 4.5 units out.
It's getting much more efficient.
So they expect in the next few years it'll be over 5.
So are there manufacturers in the world today that are, you know, gearing up and focusing on diesel engines that would go to the biodiesel market?
Well, you know, that's a really difficult thing. We've never had good support from our engine manufacturers in this country. Never had good support. But it doesn't surprise me seeing what happened to them in the last few years. They've never supported the idea of more fuel efficient vehicles. That's why they crashed, because they can't think outside the box. And talking to Eddie Sturman, you know, he's gone. He's now working with one of the big three, but you know, he's over the last 5 years, he's gone to all these different engine manufacturers, and what he gets is, well, I mean, he's invented an engine that has no camshaft and works better.
How does it do that? I mean,
Well, if I was a mechanic, I could tell you, but
Bob
could tell you. And he goes to the engine manufacturers and says, "Look at this engine." He shows them it works, and Bob's the most skeptical mechanic of all. So we actually had to go there and see his plant. He's got a very impressive plant with a whole ground level. I think it's like a $6 million plant. Whole ground level is just all the mechanical equipment, and then it's 3 stories, and then he's got the whole testing lab on the top story. So we actually saw this. I dragged Bob over there after I found out about this guy, and you know, we expected when we got there would be a guy tinkering in his garage. No, this is really sophisticated stuff. But when he goes around to these engine manufacturers, the pushback, oh, I just signed a 10-year contract with our camshaft manufacturer. I don't think we can switch gears right now.
See, that's not out of the box at all.
That's the American way of thinking in our car industry right now.
That's why it'll go down again.
And he's been very close to, because the Japanese want this technology and the Russians want this technology, and so it's people like us that are saying, no, come on, there's got to be a way to get people in this country, you know, because we'll lose it. Well, it'll be, you know, we'll be buying his engine from the Japanese.
They'll be doing it, and they'll learn the manufacturing
and he
tricks.
is actually somebody who came to this country a long time ago as an immigrant. You know, he escaped the Holocaust, and he wants to develop this for the U.S. He's just, you know, he's not getting a lot of support. So,
oh, that's too bad.
So, you know, those are some of the things that we've seen in the engine manufacturer side of things, that where we and even dealing with the 2 car companies that we originally started dealing with, which is VW and Mercedes. If you go to Europe, you'll see no problem with biodiesel, but you come over here, and the mindset is, you know, when you take your car in for service, oh, you shouldn't be using that fuel, because that. And you know, part of why that happened was in the early days of biodiesel, before there was a U.S. standard, which we were part of helping create. There were a lot of people making fuel, and there still are, in their kitchen, in their garage. And so various qualities of biodiesel were out there being called biodiesel. People even used to refer to just plain vegetable oil, use vegetable oil as biodiesel. And it took us a long time to get Willie Nelson to stop calling vegetable oil biodiesel. But
he's your partner.
Yes, he's our partner in a couple of different ventures. But so with all these varying degrees of substances being called biodiesel, in the early years, the engine manufacturer industry kind of clamped down and said, we're just not going to endorse this. But now we have U.S. standards, we have testing methods, we have our company guarantees that all of our fuel meets ASTM
So I want to talk
standards.
about that. So you have patents when you put these plants in place?
No.
You just do it your special way,
Right.
your special
It's
brand.
IP, yeah.
So is it possible? Is anybody else doing this, by the way? I imagine they are.
Biodiesel, oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
you know, proliferating plants the way you do.
Yeah, probably. I think there aren't any other companies that are doing it quite the same way. You know, with our model that have built as many plants as we
Is
built.
anybody doing it with agriculture the way you're hoping to do it here in Hawaii?
Well, they were doing that with agriculture in Europe before we started doing it over here.
How about in the U.S.?
In the U.S., yeah, there are. Yeah.
And how about when we're getting animal fats from Iowa, I think, for HECO? You don't run the Kapolei plant. Anybody? Well, I guess they are doing that, and I guess you get a sufficiently quality product that way.
Well, and also the thing about power generation is it doesn't require as high level of quality as an engine, as a vehicle.
Oh, interesting. So is it possible? I mean, going back to the Ahupua approach, is it possible for me to make a kind of still in my backyard? You know, to get some plans and go down to, you know, Lowe's or Home Depot and buy the pipes and
Sure.
actually create biodiesel out of my kitchen product
Sure.
and run my truck that way.
Yeah, it'll probably cost you about $20 a gallon to make it on your own, but it's fun. It's a hobby. You know, it's like making your own beer. You're not going to get the quality.
But could you design something that I could buy?
Well, there
and
are
put
people
my-
who have designed those kinds of home products. the thing is that, you know, when we tell people when they call us up and ask us about doing it, we say, well, we don't endorse it because the type of fuel you're going to get is maybe not
Yeah.
the quality of
Right, and
fuel.
then you
And
go
this is
driving
another
down the road and
problem that the
something
engine
happens.
manufacturers have had, is people putting fuel in and then wanting, and then something happens and then they go in for their warranty, you know.
Sure.
With ours, you know, it's all guaranteed that it's ASTM, it meets
Right, right, which is a
D6751 standard.
big difference for when you're talking
So,
about an engine.
so, you know, it's fun. There are a lot of people who do it. I've had people who have tried to do it and started collecting used cooking oil and then will call me up and say, you know what, I got 80 gallons of used cooking oil over here. I'm just not going to get through this. Can you just come and pick it up? And, you know, and I've also had people who have made their own fuel or use filtered vegetable oil and then have come to our pump and used our fuel and said, wow, my car stopped knocking, you know, or, you know,
Okay.
their car ran better because it's real fuel. So, you know, there's a trade-off, but some people like to do it because they're do-it-yourselfers. There are two components to that that are not quite legal. One of them is that if you're picking up used cooking oil from a restaurant without a permit, waste management permit, that's a violation of county code.
What's the real damage?
You
Is
could
there
be
any?
fined if you.
No, but I mean, what's the real damage to the community about
Well,
doing
because
that?
if you're making biodiesel and it requires inputs like methanol and lye, and then there's a waste product, and then what are you doing with
What do
that
you
waste
do with it,
product?
yeah.
Where are you dumping that? Where are you storing your methanol? You know, our methanol storage. Methanol is the only flammable part of this, and so it has to have very specific storage guidelines.
So it's better to let professionals do it.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing is that, you know, everybody who drives on our roads that we pay for with tax money is supposed to be paying road tax. And there is an exemption for biodiesel that's made commercially. But if you're doing it on your own, you know, you're saving money. You're not paying
You're
for
not
your fuel,
contributing to
maybe,
the effort, yeah.
but you're also not contributing to,
So
you know,
you're cheating the formula.
kind of. I mean, in the early days, the U.S. government was actually arresting people for making their own fuel because they weren't paying the road tax.
It sounds like
you'd
the
see
still
these,
in the backyard.
you see these little old couples getting arrested, you know,
I
because
love
they're
it.
making their own fuel, which was totally ridiculous. But, you know, I mean, that just, you know, in theory, that we should all be contributing in the ways that
To
we
the
contribute.
development, yeah.
Yeah, and it's hard to get an industry going if people are undermining you by.
So let's talk about the suppliers from Southeast Asia and the palm oil and all that. You know, I had the impression the reason HECO favored the guys in Iowa with the animal fats was they thought they'd get some flack if they bought it from Southeast Asia, you know, because of the circumstances of production and the labor issues and all that. How good is that fuel, the palm oil? I mean, there have been all kinds of issues about it. Wasn't there a company that was going to make it?
Well,
right
it's,
here?
I don't think the quality of the fuel was the issue. I think it was the idea that you're still importing something from a foreign country.
Mhm.
It doesn't add anything to our energy security issues. There's also there's a huge pushback from the environmental community because there was a lot of unrest down in Indonesia when these palm oil plantations started taking off, with people losing their lands and then parts of the rainforest being decimated to put these plantations on, which kind of
Is that still happening?
No, but you can't grow a rainforest back. You know, I mean, if you've already decimated,
It's done, yeah.
does anybody want to support that model where, you know, if you decimate a centuries-old rainforest, and the rainforests are the lungs of the earth. They sequester more CO2 than any other component in our earth. So is it really an environmentally positive impact if you're decimating a rainforest, building less dense palm oil plantations, than shipping that oil on petroleum barges halfway around the world? You know, plus the way they burn down, the rainforests get burnt. So now you're putting all that CO2 into the atmosphere from burning the rainforest. So there were all those peripheral issues, besides the fact that, you know, the real issue for, I think, our government is that doesn't add anything to our sustainability, energy security efforts. So I think that's why they're looking at, I mean, we can call anything from the U.S. domestic, right?
So that puts HECO or any of the utilities in the islands in an interesting spot, because I suspect that if they did an RFP and they got palm oil, there would be pushback. And so, on the other hand, they can't right now go out and buy biofuel here. That would satisfy their, you know, existing infrastructure with the generators. and they can go to the mainland, which I guess is a good compromise. So what we've got to do is, tell me if you agree, what we've got to do is get a local supply that could meet at least their peak oil demand, their peak.
Peak oil would be good, as a backup supply. I think the general community, and I talk a lot with Mark Duda and the folks in the solar industry and the wind guys, and we're all. It's funny because I hear from Robbie Almo, these guys have got to stop fighting with each other, but we're all real friends and we're actually all fairly supportive of each other. Is that what I hear from the rest of the energy community is that renewable energy community is that HECO is not supportive enough of these other types of technologies because they're going for the low-hanging fruit. And what's easy is to keep doing the same old turbine engine plants that they've been doing to generate electricity.
You're not talking about peak oil, you're talking about the base load.
Well, even even when they built that plant, it was, why are they trying to, because they kind of fluctuate back and forth between saying that they're supporting wind and solar and these things and really pushing to, supplant as many gallons of petroleum with biofuels. So, so I think they haven't shown, they might have verbally expressed it, but they still haven't shown the rest of the community in renewable energy that they're serious about wind, solar, geothermal, and these other things, and that they are just looking at biofuels as a backup. If they are, then we can say, okay, how many gallons does that mean? And we can look at whether that fits into the agricultural plan that should be developed for the state of Hawaii.
And then keep it at home that way.
Yeah, instead of saying, well, we need 100 million gallons every year. This is the only state in the country that uses this,
so much fossil fuel.
Well, liquid fuel. It uses this much liquid fuel.
Yeah.
The other states, and we also are limited because we're not big enough to have nuclear energy and some of these other things, but there's the thinking has got to be a little more outside the box. Okay, maybe you're not going to be able to build any more power plants that are based on liquid fuel burning generation.
Kelly, you're making history, and I really hope that we can continue this kind of conversation because I didn't even start my notes. Next time, okay?
Okay, sounds good, Jay.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.